Do Kwon will be extradited to the U.S. That decision announced last week to wrap up the year. From our interview, I can tell you he did not want to come to the U.S. back then. Things may have changed in terms of the thinking there, but back then I can tell you the thinking was that you wouldn't want to go to the U.S. because you could be tried here, potentially serve jail time, and then be sent back to South Korea, try it again over there, and serve another sentence. So that doesn't seem great if you are Do Kwon. Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of Coinage, our last of the year. As we wrap up our holiday season, hope everybody had a nice Christmas or Hanukkah if you celebrate either one of those, or just a nice wrap up to 2024 if you're agnostic and or atheist. Or into crypto, you've come to the right place, because we have one more show to deliver to you as we wrap up 2024 and look ahead, more importantly, to 2025. Happy New Year, too, since we're almost there. Want to check the charts and get you caught up to speed in terms of what we're watching, as things are starting to look a little bit uglier. Not the Santa Claus rally that a lot of people were expecting to see. But want to take a look at what we are seeing right now and kind of give you the lay of the land from what we've heard from a few different folks, from Pantera, from Grayscale, from SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce, all the smart people that we've talked to wrap up the year. And right now, taking a look at Bitcoin as it hovers around that ever important $90,000 level. Haven't broken through 91 yet, but we'll see what happens throughout the day, as it has gotten ugly on the heat map right now. Basically, all the crypto in the red, the stable coins, the only ones that you'll see on this chart that are in the green. And obviously, as we know about those, that's not really what we should be paying attention to. In the top right of your screen, you can't really see it there, but stock selling off too in their end to 2024 as well. Importantly, as we've been highlighting over the last few days, MicroStrategy at the heart of some of this, as we'll be chatting about them as they buy another scoop of Bitcoin, though the shares right now not reacting the way that they normally do, perhaps because of the wider sell-off across all markets. And the reason being, as we're going to dig into in a second, as we heard from Sean Farrell not too long ago, the things to watch right now are pretty numerous, shall we say, and it's not too complicated. None of this really has anything to do with crypto. This is when we put our macro hats on and take a look at a few other factors that are rising right now. The strength of the dollar, obviously up, as well as the yield on the 10-year bond. I want to take a look at that chart as well, because right now, the yield on the 10-year, 4.54, coming down a little bit today, but in general, basically approaching the highs that we saw back in April in this year, when it hit a year high of 4.7, and really pretty pronounced. If you see that run up, it's the bottom right of the chart. That was back in, what is that, the beginning of December. So, we had that big run up after the election results, and then the 10-year basically exploded. And anytime we see the 10-year move higher, that's essentially a flight to safety, a little risk-off action. We've seen that. That's partially the reason why we're seeing a sell-off in stocks in terms of kind of where the market's allocated. We covered as well the hawkish pivot by the Fed. We heard all this from Pantera, by the way. If you haven't watched that episode, go back and look at that from Cosmo Zhang, portfolio manager over there, what we've seen. But in general, when you look ahead to 2025, there are just some market stats to throw out there that we got from Fundstrat. Again, bear with me when we talk about macro. We'll get into the crypto nitty-gritty in a second, but it's important to highlight because this isn't just crypto-specific moves that we need to highlight. It's also generally what we're seeing across the market, which matters because a lot of this right now, as we said, when we talk about the catalysts or maybe some of the support coming from MicroStrategy buying up Bitcoin, the fund inflows from, traditional investors looking at Bitcoin ETFs, all of those are tied into a little bit of this because you have some of the unwind right now. If things look less supportive from a market's perspective, then you are going to have maybe some people take their foot off the gas. I think that's what we're seeing, but important to highlight why we are optimistic when we look ahead to 2025. Not only the idea of all the pivots that we're going to get into in a second when it comes to pro-crypto moves at the SEC and other agencies within the U.S. government, but also maybe some potential macro market things to look forward to as well. One of those being that, a lot of people expected a Santa Claus rally. We're not exactly seeing that. So what does it mean for the beginning of trading in 2025? Because you're not going to really see a bottom in terms of pricing in 2024, when, you know, everyone's away from their desk, huge firms aren't around, the decision makers aren't around to make those calls to say, yeah, you know what, we should be allocating here, we should be buying the dip. No one's in the office really to do that. So you're not going to see, I don't think, any bottom formation, at least in terms of this chart, for Bitcoin's price, as we look at it over a longer term timeline. You're not going to necessarily see that come in over the next couple of days of trading, I think. I think post-New Year's, though, there are a couple things to highlight, and I want to highlight those now, which are that historically, we saw the weakest breadth of trading in terms of NYC stocks. So these are stocks that are traded at the New York Stock Exchange. Only 18% of those stocks advanced on Friday last week to wrap up the year. That was the lowest ever reading, according to FundStrat, for the final 3 days of the year in the last 65 years. So weak breadth, historically weak breadth when it comes to stocks. And when you look at what that means for trading in the next month, as in the start to 2025, when it comes to that breadth to end the calendar year, it often signals market gains in the near term, which means that, you know, if a lot of this is macro driven and if a lot of this isn't really crypto specific, we got to look to the traditional markets to get a sense of what might happen next. And when it comes to the 12 worst readings of market breadth at year end since 1962, again, all this is coming from FundStrat, data shows that the next 3 days of gains are up 75% of the time. That is to say that on average, you have about a 0.5% of gain in terms of stocks over the next 3 days. 75% and 3/4 of the time, things are positive, which is good. And when you look at, instead of just the next 3 days, over the next month, 75% of the time, things are positive by an average of 5.2%. That's the median gain over the month to start the year after such weak breadth. And so I look at that data, as FundStrat is telling us, and say, hey, look, maybe things aren't good. Maybe we didn't get the Santa Claus rally that a lot of people expected. But when you look ahead to the next month of trading, there are reasons to be optimistic when you are bouncing off the absence of a Santa Claus rally. At least that's what history tells us. Could things be different this time? Sure. But 3/4 of the time, you are right to be bullish. And you're right to be bullish by about a 5.2% gain when it comes to stocks. Now, I say that because this is a crypto show. We talk about crypto here. That's macro. That's over there. All of this can change, but in general, the sentiment still remains, I believe, though we are seeing some weakness to wrap up the year, and it's a lot of weakness that people didn't expect. Who are we to say that this shouldn't have been expected when we go back to this chart over here? If we got it, no, we don't. Got to bring it back up. When you look at kind of the run-up to close out the year since the election, I think it makes sense to see a little bit of a breather in terms of where we're at now at 91, after surging to 108, I think is where we topped out. Pretty close to Sean Farrell's year-end price target, by the way. Texas, my producer over here, says it's not good enough, didn't get close enough to what he said at 115. I'm going to round up. I'm going to give him some credit. When you consider all the way back in January last year when we were sitting at about 41, 45, the guy says we're going to 115. He got pretty close at 108. Not going to hit 115, it doesn't look like, unless something crazy happens in the next 24 hours. But nonetheless, I think a healthy pullback, and so we move on. How do we move on? Well, I'll tell you how Michael Saylor is moving on. He's moving on by buying up Bitcoin, which, again, is the big thing to highlight in today's show, because he did it in true Michael Saylor fashion, teased ahead on Sunday, yesterday, yet again, as he always does, on Twitter, saying, hey, look, I think we should buy some more Bitcoin. And today, sure enough, that's what he did. That's what MicroStrategy announced, scooping up another more than 2,000 Bitcoin, adding to the stash. This is the 8th consecutive week. This is the headline over there, that we've seen MicroStrategy scoop up more Bitcoin. And he made it official, as he always does, on Twitter. Pulling that tweet up right now. And, you know, again, I think this is going to happen, right? This is what we're going to see when people expect these things. You're not going to see as big of a move, because almost everybody knows when Michael Saylor tweets this on Sunday, it's going to be followed by a tweet on Monday announcing the specific terms and how much Bitcoin they acquired. This is nothing new. And by the 8th consecutive week, the market somewhat gets used to it. And so we aren't seeing that big of a reaction this time around, when Michael Saylor announces that they've acquired this much Bitcoin, it brings his average purchase price up to 62,000 now, holding almost 500,000 Bitcoin. Sorry. Yeah, 500,000 Bitcoin. It's a lot of Bitcoin that he's holding here, sitting on a total worth of those Bitcoin of close to $30 billion. So again, nothing crazy new here, and perhaps expected that you wouldn't see such a huge market pop off of that news because everyone's expecting it. And perhaps more importantly, the other big thing to consider here is that the market is digesting all of this. And again, focusing more on everything we just discussed in terms of the macro picture, rather than, I guess, what we're seeing here from Michael Saylor and scooping up billions of dollars of Bitcoin, as he always does. Those numbers seem large when it comes to one person or one company, but when it comes to the actual market, I think there are much larger forces at play, which is why we open the show on those. But again, as we are to do, we must highlight that Michael Saylor is not backing down, even though we are here at a dip. Michael Saylor keeps buying the dip. I think perhaps more importantly, we should shift our attention. And again, this is not my take. This is the take from the VC firm, the hedge fund, whatever you want to call Pantera, the smartest guys in the room, that are up 1,000x on their Bitcoin investment since they've been doing this for what? I think longer than a decade, technically, investing in Bitcoin. And if you have a firm that's up 1,000x, you might want to listen to what they say, maybe perhaps more than what I say, though I am the host of the show and I am beloved around here in the halls of Coinage. But I'm very happy that Cosmo Zhang is a Coinage member. Let's talk altcoins, because he at Pantera is the man who has been saying it's time to take a look at Bitcoin, or sorry, at the altcoins beyond Bitcoin. A very big, important difference to highlight there. And when we look at the Bitcoin dominance chart, Texas, that's one that we had prepared ahead of the show because it is an interesting one to take a look at. Bitcoin dominance took a pretty big dive as we saw excitement in early December, and then rebounded as people rotated back into it. So it's kind of fluctuating, but nonetheless, topping out a little bit here. And altcoins in this sell-off even today, kind of faring a little bit better than some of the majors in Bitcoin and Ether. And I'll throw Solana into that mix maybe as well. But in general, he's saying it's time to get a little bit more bullish on altcoins. Want to take a listen to what he told us last week. If you weren't around for that show or haven't watched it yet, I'd suggest you do. But since it's the holidays, maybe you missed it. And he's saying it's time to pay attention to altcoins, man, because phase 2 is finally here. Take a listen. How big is the opportunity for these other altcoins? How do you see that shaping up? What inning are we in now? And what should people know?
Yeah, I think just to describe this a little bit, it's like, man, we are still such early innings. If we were to look at price action this year, everything else is really underperformed, but Bitcoin by a lot. So there hasn't been that strong price rebound and everything else. But we're on the cusp of this opening up of innovation, this legitimacy of this asset class that should really, really propel all these other things forward. And we're already seeing that, right? Like post-election, the Bitcoin dominance, which measures Bitcoin as a percent of total crypto market cap, has declined from 60 to 54 at some point. So nearly 10 points of relative outperformance by everything else. I fully anticipate that to continue if indeed we are successful at creating good value-added products in the blockchain space.
So good value-added products in the blockchain space are the ones we should be looking at if you do believe Cosmo there from Pantera. Again, one of the smartest guys, Coinage NFT holder as well, one of our network members, saying that, look, phase 2 of altcoin season is finally here. And if you do believe that we are going to bounce off these, as I believe, in January, off these lows and continue the surge higher in Q1, this does seem to be that kind of third quarter-esque. I want to go back to that chart, Texas. We have it kind of where we're at in terms of this phase. It does seem to be that third quarter phase of the game in a 4-quarter game. To use the basketball metaphor here, you're basically looking at that huge gap right now saying altcoins are going to play this catch-up in Q1. If you believe that, and I have no reason to doubt Pantera, I would say that there are some pretty big opportunities here to really lean into altcoins. And perhaps you might be wondering, Zach, which one should we be leaning into? And again, not financial advice here, but highlighting maybe some of the other people who have been around the block. And we're going to dig into our own community's picks in just a second. But it might be worth highlighting that Grayscale has added a few different tokens to their mix as well. I want to bring this up from the block, highlighting those changes over at Grayscale, adding 6 tokens to its top 20 for the next quarter. So if we are going to say Q1 is going to be the quarter to watch, and again, it might be difficult to sell you on that as we are seeing red on the charts again, these are the tokens that Grayscale is indeed adding to its top 20. They've got a few in there, including Athena, Hype, Virtual, Jupiter, Jito, and Grass. Jupiter and Jito, by the way, we've been talking about ever since we had Sean Farrell on from Fundstrat, mentioning that he truly does enjoy some Solana plays, and betting on the Solana plays that exist over there aren't necessarily bad ideas if you think the meme coinery is going to continue, which we're going to get into our meme coin of the week in just a second. But if you do believe that, Jupiter and Jito, other Solana adjacent plays make a lot of sense. Virtual, perhaps this idea of, AI agents on base catching some wind, Grayscale adding that to their top plays. In general, those seem to be the themes for what we're seeing play out. Meme coin still to continue. AI agents still to continue. Solana's trend still to continue with the idea of ETFs coming in 2025. So not surprising to see these additions from Grayscale, but I wanted to highlight those in terms of tokens perhaps that you could be looking at for Q1 2025. And nothing truly that surprising there from the names that we've heard. I will just get into the tokens that we are going to be watching maybe later on and overlap across the board with what we just learned there from Grayscale. We'll talk about that in our top crypto project to come up here in our run of show. But if you notice, there's something to discuss before we get there, which is, of course, big news breaking over last week as a story near and dear to the hearts of anyone who watches Coinage. Kwon, which was kind of our first thing that we ever highlighted here in our studio after we went to Singapore to talk with the founder of Terra in the first interview that he gave post-collapse in that $40+ billion collapse. The news there that Terra founder Do Kwon going to be extradited to the U.S. This was a decision that went back and forth for quite some time over in Montenegro. Went through their court system, their Supreme Court eventually ruling on this one, saying that Do Kwon will be extradited to the U.S. That decision announced last week to wrap up the year. No one was really sure whether he was going to be going to South Korea or the U.S. From our interview, I can tell you, he did not want to come to the U.S. back then. Of course, it's been a year plus since that all happened. So things may have changed in terms of the thinking there. But back then, I can tell you the thinking was that you wouldn't want to go to the U.S. because you could be tried here, potentially serve jail time, and then be sent back to South Korea, tried again over there, and serve another sentence. So that doesn't seem great if you are Do Kwon. But those are kind of, what was on the table in terms of why he may have wanted to be extradited to South Korea. Again, all of this could have changed when you're looking at a U.S. president now in Donald Trump, who may very well pardon Ross Ulbricht from the Silk Road, as he's promised on the campaign trail, and wants to be crypto president of the planet. So when you consider those, very different than maybe what would have happened under a Biden administration, perhaps. Perhaps maybe the decision had flipped. Who knows? I'm not one to say what these deals may look like behind closed doors, because I'm not one who knows. But I can tell you what we learned in our interview, which, again, if you haven't watched our full episode on the Terra collapse that came out in 22, highly recommend you to go check that one out on our YouTube page or at coinage.media, either one. But interesting because it's going to add to another slate of decisions to come down the pike in 2025, including what potentially may happen with Celsius founder Alex Mashinsky as he wraps up that plea deal. But in general, we want to leave all that stuff in 2024 when we're talking about the legal problems that hit crypto. And this one is one that's been lingering there. Pretty smart, by the way. If you saw what happened with Sam Bankman-Fried and getting 25 years, now in prison with Luigi, P. Diddy, and potentially now perhaps, it'd be pretty crazy if Do Kwon was also an MDC, just a block down away from where we are in our studio here in Brooklyn, but potentially all of them in the same jail. Pretty crazy to think about. And the idea of what might happen, when we get to next year, a lot of time's passed. And anytime you have a crime, potentially, I'm not going to say it's a crime. He's innocent until proven guilty. But anytime you have that happen, the public outrage kind of melted down. And there weren't that many Terra victims, though I may be one. In the US, I don't even know how many people in South Korea. We talked to a lot of guests who say that crypto's back in South Korea because people have moved on from the Terra collapse. You got to wonder if the idea of going to Montenegro and just chilling out for a little bit, serving time in jail over there for a passport issue after, he tried to get out of Montenegro using Costa Rican passports. You got to wonder if that was kind of the way to play it, and whether or not Sam's situation might be different if he delayed it, fighting extradition in the Bahamas. If the outrage would have melted away, you could have dragged all this along. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer either, but it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out in 2025. Very different case than what we saw play out with FTX. And as we saw from the SEC's trial, the civil fraud trial that happened, which we covered for everybody at CoinEdge, a lot of the claims that existed about Terra and Do Kwon were not brought up in that trial. And so I don't know if they were just withholding some of those facts or if they really do not have a strong case against Do Kwon in the Terra collapse. We'll see what plays out. We'll see which charges have remained, which have changed. It's been a long time. So we'll see what happens in 2025. Perhaps something to just keep on your radar as that narrative falls into next year. Some of these things do not stay in 2024. One thing that is sure to continue, though, is meme coinery. And in our meme coin of the week, this is a weird one. Texas, I'm not even sure if you're prepared for this because I know what's coming and I'm not prepared for this. I'm sure there's probably a lot of viewers who are already keen or up to speed on what the hell is happening with Styro Steve, but that is going to be our meme coin of the week. And you may be wondering, if you haven't heard of it yet, what the hell is Styro Steve? So let me fill you in on what the hell Styro Steve is, which again is a difficult thing for me to do. Every time we talk about these meme coins, it's not something I like to talk about because I don't know what the hell's happening. But this is what we are looking at today, Styro Steve. Basically, what this is a man who has a styrofoam head, and he's removing a hair from his girlfriend's head every day and taping it to his styrofoam head, dubbed Styro Steve. It's dumb when I say it out loud. Even dumber when you look into the theories around it, but maybe not so dumb if you think about what this chart looks like. Texas, I think we have one of the charts to look at with Styro Steve, courtesy from our friends of Deck Screener. But when we look over at that one, a lot of the movements there are based on the idea of, if you don't have it, I can bring it up to you, the idea of who's behind Styro Steve, and some very interesting conspiracy theories, shall we say. Crypto loves a good conspiracy theory. And so anytime you can kind of throw some dots out there but not fully connect them at all whatsoever, that is the type of thing that gets crypto going. And we are looking here at the chart of Styro Steve. Let's take a look over the last 5 days. Hold on here. Let's see. Okay, yeah, so over the last 5 days, you'll see a nice little run up post-Christmas and then giving a lot of that back as perhaps some of this gets debunked. We reached out to GameStop, haven't heard back yet, but I want to tell you why we are putting this one as our meme coin of the week. Not only because it's really weird, as all meme coins usually are, but because of some other reasons as well, which we can dig into now. Bear with me as I move over to my other tab here. But this is essentially the thing that kicked it off. This user over here, I want to highlight what's going on, which is this theory that it is none other than GameStop CEO Ryan Cohen behind the account of Styro Steve, that he has launched this meme coin to potentially issue equity from GameStop using none other than the token behind Styro Steve. And it's a pretty crazy thread, I'm not going to lie, but there are a lot of interesting theories in this, which is, and even our system doesn't want me to show you. There's a conspiracy behind the conspiracy, Texas. Every time I bring this up, it crashes. But essentially, you have this guy putting out a thread, taking a look at all the similarities between the guy who's in these Styro Steve videos or posts and Ryan Cohen. And I just want to run through a couple of them to maybe potentially, I don't know, fuel the conspiracy. Dare I say I'm playing a part in this? No, not to do that, but to at least inform you of perhaps why we are seeing the moves we are seeing in Styro Steve right now. And a lot of them come down to, I don't know, things that do make sense. So I'm not going to say it's crazy, because there's some things here, Texas, that are worth throwing out there. And one of them is that, you've got veiny arms and a right-handed man who wears a watch. Ryan Cohn wears a watch, and he's right-handed. So there you go. And then there's just a lot of, similarities in terms of what time is on the watch when these things are posted. You can make up your mind in terms of whether or not these things are real. He's famous for his googly eyes photo during the GameStop short squeeze. The ticker for Styro Steve is SS, short squeeze. And a lot of the same things exist. Now, I would say, if you were trying to justify this meme coin, you could pick out all these things, pay someone like this account to maybe find these things. You could engineer all of this, and it'd be pretty easy. And so I would take it all with a grain of salt. Again, we reached out to GameStop to see if there's any truth to any of this. We'll see if we get a comment. If we do, we'll let you know. But these are, again, meme coins, and this is what happens in meme coin land. But we have put it on your radar now. If it pops, I'm going to take credit for putting it on your radar. I'm not beneath that. Of course, some of the other tokens that we have put on the radar in our meme coin corner, if we can call it that, have popped. And I look at Do Kwon and Do Queen as two other ones that have popped and now sit in the Coinage treasury. But anyways, let the record show we've put Styro Steve on your radar at $7 million, the market cap, after it ran up from 100K not too long ago. So we put it out there. Is it one of our crypto projects of the year? No, it is not. Is that a segue that I get paid to make? Yes, it is. Because that is how we wrap up the show, as we take a look at our big winners from Crypto Project of the Year. And this is where it gets spicy, folks, because we're down to 4. And perhaps a bit of a surprise, because a lot of people picked Polymarket when we started this as a community-owned bracket for anyone to vote on. People said Polymarket might be the one who takes the cake because of how big of a year they've had. However, they've lost. This is our update to the bracket. Polymarket knocked out an upset mover into the Final Four. I hope I don't get sued for using that term. Maybe our final quattro. You've got Thorchain beating Polymarket to advance, now facing Stacks on the right side of the bracket. Perhaps, maybe, by the way, a pretty large look ahead to the themes that I think will be huge in 2025, which is how do you earn yield on your Bitcoin? Something that we talked to SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce about in revisiting perhaps the idea of staking, stacking, and it Stacks and Thorchain on the right side of the bracket. On the left side of the bracket, we had Base move past, who did they top? I can't remember who they topped. Base move past none other than Avalanche in our last round of voting, and will now face Solana. This is kind of spicy because if you're on crypto Twitter, this is the huge battle between one of Ethereum's leading layer 2s, if not the layer 2 to watch in 25 and 24, going up against Solana, which of course is the other giant in the room when it comes to scaling and what they've been able to do. Who's going to win that one? I have no idea. But since we're on ETH mainnet, we have a lot of people in our community who are ETH fans. Doesn't mean that Solana can't pull it off. They're here in our Final Four, and doesn't mean that you can't join our community to vote for Solana as well if you'd like to. Of course, you can go to coinage.media. Today's the last day we're going to let anyone join in the year before we move on to 2025. But for everyone who has voted 3 times this year, congratulations. If you've gone through our flow, you're an active member and entitled to a Coinage Media patronage dividend. More info on those coming out. Will be the first NFT project, I believe, to have paid out a dividend. An NFT project paying a dividend, patronage dividend, I must say, legally. It's a big step for us, and I want to thank everybody in our Coinage community for playing such a huge part in what we do as a community-owned outlet. If you want to join us, you can, as always, go to coinage.media to mint now and go through the steps to become an official member to also earn a patronage dividend in 2025. That will do it for our last show in 2024. Happy New Year, everybody. We hope you had a great year. We hope your gains are huge. We hope we take many more trips to the moon in 25. Happy New Year for everybody here at Coinage to you. Thank you again for listening. If you haven't yet, you can stake with us at coinage.media and become a member. Check out all the biggest headlines in Web3. For everyone here at Coinage, I'm Zach Guzman, signing off for the last time in 24. We'll see you again next year.